All right, should we open the meeting? Are we ready to go?
Up to you.
Are we on? They're on.
Are we good? All right, at 6:02 on Thursday, January 12th, I call to order the Oak Park Heights Planning Commission meeting. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, I think everybody's got the agenda in front of them. Are there any edits or changes needed to the agenda tonight?
Well, I wonder if we want to talk about
Should we
this
add?
thing here.
Yeah, should we add under new business that we need to talk about appointing a new planning commission
Or
member?
deciding what we want to do, yeah. Yep.
Just note that change. We'll do that after the urban heat islands.
After or before.
Let's do it after.
Yeah.
All right, do I have a motion to approve the agenda with the addition of the new commission member needed?
I make a motion we approve the agenda with the changes.
In a second?
Second.
So moved in second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
It is approved. All right, you should all have your meeting minutes from December 8th, 2022 Planning Commission meeting. Did everyone get a chance to review those? Was there any adjustments or changes? I didn't see anything out of the ordinary in there. I didn't personally, but
I'd like to move approval of the minute meetings from December 8th as
Second.
presented.
we have a motion and a second. All signify approval by saying aye.
Aye.
So moved. Department Commission Liaison, any other reports from anyone tonight? Eric, Mike?
We did, Mr. Chair, we did have a council meeting on Tuesday night. It was fairly short, a couple things. We did approve the Fat Tire Bike Rally. I think, what was that, Eric, set for February 19th? We did go through 2023 council appointments, and those are all going to stay the same as they were this year. So I'll stay the Planning Commission council rep. We did set a couple work sessions prior on goals, legislative stuff. Eric, I think it was January 24th and in front of our February 14th meeting. Is that correct?
Yep.
That's all I have.
Okay. Any other questions for Mike? Eric, you got anything?
Oh, we did close on the sale of the property on Stagecoach. So that is done, and we will wait to see when the final plans come back in from Siegfried.
Cool. Good. Good. Anything else? All right, we'll move over to the visitor and public comment. This is an opportunity for the public to address the commission with questions, comments on issues that are not part of the regular agenda. So if you're here to talk about the agenda items tonight, we'll hold an opportunity there when we have the public meeting.
Excuse me,
Please.
Mr. Chair.
Yep.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. However, the policy, and as stated on the visitors' comment section, is that anybody who would like to have their 3 minutes, so to speak, whether those items are or are not on the agenda, is now would be the appropriate time.
Oh, okay. I read that.
If there is a stated public hearing, then that's a different story. But the council has set this policy forward.
Okay.
So
Thank you for correcting me.
you didn't know. It's very small print.
Well, it doesn't say that, but it's good to
Yeah,
know.
we should have Julie update that.
Actually, it
That's
does
how
say
says.
that.
Well,
are
with-
not
on
part.
issues that are not part of the regular.
Oh,
agenda.
are or are not, yep, but so that's what it
Issues that are not
should
part
be
of the-
say.
Yep, so
It did say that last month, if I'm not mistaken, so I think it
No big
was.
deal. All right, so do we
We
have
should arm
any
wrestle, don't you think?
public comments tonight?
With that in mind, one cannot disappoint.
Please state your name.
I'm Jim Kramer, 5475 Oak Green Place North, and you are talking, it is my understanding that over the last several months, you have driven out Mr. White from the Planning Commission. And
I got 1 foot out the door.
that's right. And
I'm being kicked out, being fired.
not you, Mr. White. Anyway, as some of you know, I have been on the Planning Commission before, but I haven't been on for several years, and the bylaws allow that someone who takes a hiatus can again be appointed, so that's something I would be interested in, being a nominee. So
That's great.
if you have any questions at any time, certainly feel free to ask.
Thank you, Mr. Kramer.
Super. Makes that part easier.
Okay, we'll move on to the public hearings, which we don't have any public hearings tonight.
That'll go fast.
So we'll move past that and on to new business. And let's start with the urban heat islands. Scott, would you like to give us a rundown?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not going to go through every line item, and if we want to do that after my comments, we can. But I'm just going to give you the really the high points, really the main discussion points. So this is something that our council member Carly Johnson had brought forward as some thoughts on it. Council said at their October meeting, first meeting in October, Planning Commission, you get the opportunity to take a look at this. And you know, we have some large parking lots in the west commercial area, mainly around Walmart, Lowe's, Menards, shopping center that includes Kowalski's. There's varying degrees of good trees in the parking islands and some really, you know, trees that have struggled and things that Kowalski's, when they came in, chopped them all down. So, you know, it's something that we need to look at. But I think one of the main elements that Carly and Eric and I talked about, and we've actually kind of talked about in the past, is our parking requirements require way too many parking spaces. They were designed at a time in the 60s, 50s, and 60s where you needed a lot of parking spaces for the people that shopped. The whole retail industry has changed. You know, how many times a week do we all order from Amazon? I do quite often. So the world has changed. You still need parking around retail, around restaurants, around service entities, but we don't need as many. And we all witness that. We drive by Walmart and, you know, we see 50 cars in a lot that's hundreds of spaces. So that's one of the things we want to tackle with this. And the other thing is increasing the size of some of those parking islands. So I'll get into that. So we took the entire section of the parking ordinance, you know, just to, you know, remind you what it looks like and to kind of take a look at that, and a few of the elements. And I'll use the page numbers at the bottom. One of the first points for quick discussion was incorporating language related to pervious pavement. That's on page 7 under surfacing. You can see the language or the notes are in bold, and you know, pervious pavement really gathered a lot of steam about 10 years ago. They developed some pretty decent products for doing that. This isn't really related to heat islands, but it is an environmental issue that those things work to a certain extent. When they're newly installed, they work beautifully. The Arboretum had done, with the University of Minnesota, had done a really cool study where they had, you know, put them to you know, a real positive effect. The problem is they need to be maintained. You need to have a special machine that goes through and sucks up all the grit and whatever that goes into those pavers over time, generally about every 5 years. And if that's not done, they really just become just like pavement. So something to think about, but I don't know if I'd put a lot of emphasis on that because it's really kind of fallen out of favor in these days. Then the next one is curbing and landscaping, number 7 on top of page 8. There's Eric had done more research than I had about some tree shading design and maintenance guidelines. Sacramento had a nice set of requirements, and so I just point that out, and that's one of the examples that we gave you. We did some, you know, cleaned up the section on handicap parking spaces on the bottom of page 9. The main thing starting on the bottom of, or start at the top of page 10 is the number of parking spaces required. So Eric and I kind of discussed it and said, well, let's take a lot of these and cut them in half. And, you know, in going through those, and I've done a lot of parking ordinances over the years, and a lot of these, even by cutting them in half, are similar to a lot of the newer parking requirements that I've seen that other cities are using. So I don't think we're drastically taking things and creating issues for us down the road. And one of the points I think that that Eric made is, let's make this not only a minimum but a maximum, so that if Menards wants to redevelop and you know, wants to increase their parking, I guess they wouldn't have room for that, but if there's ability for them to increase parking, we'd still make them go through a conditional use permit to say, why do you need all these parking spaces? Show us that you need all these parking spaces. So it becomes a minimum and a maximum, and I think that's a really good way to look at it. So again, I won't go through these in detail. Some of them we didn't change. Mainly related to schools, and the reason being, they need all those parking spaces. You know, again, I don't always drive by the high school parking lot and notice, but I think those parking lots are still pretty full. Am I incorrect about that? I mean, every time I've noticed, you know, during the school day, they need all those parking spaces.
They're always full.
And they're probably, if I remember right, it's been a number of years since we've done a conditional use permit for them for parking, but I think they're right about where they're supposed to be as far as the required number of spaces. Again, you know, that is one of the few, you'll see on page 13, it's FF is school, elementary, and junior high. GG is school, high school through college. We just left those the way they are. You go down a little bit, shopping centers, 6 per thousand, 6 spaces per 1,000 square feet of gross floor area. Real common shopping center requirement. Well, you know, that's been, you know, used for like the Kohl's development and so forth. I drove through that parking lot tonight. There's,
more
you know,
snow
there's a
than
number of
cars.
people. I mean, people are shopping, but they don't need 6 per thousand parking spaces. So I think this was a really good start with all that. And, you know, when we want to get into more details or maybe have you guys think about them a little bit more and maybe say, hey, Scott, you know, maybe that doesn't make sense. The other one I didn't change is B, baseball fields and stadiums, and 10, at least 1 parking spaces for each seats of design capacity. I looked at a few other ordinances, and that's pretty consistent. So that's on page 10 in B.
Oh.
So I didn't change that one. I didn't cut that one in half because you know, it didn't seem to fit right. I could be wrong about that. I may circle that one and do a little bit more research on that, but.
So was B and which other one?
B, baseball fields and stadiums,
And
because I
I?
didn't change. And then, yeah, I.
And there's nothing to change there, I guess.
Let me think. Just hitting on a few of these instead of going through all of them. On page 11, elderly senior citizen housing, 1/2 space per unit. I think that makes perfect sense. Not all these elderly people have cars. So, you know, I think.
Maybe too many do.
So I mean, one question I have that we haven't looked at, right? Everybody's got to have a snow removal policy, and we're looking at more snow this year than we've ever had before. Those parking lots are being used for snow. So when we think through this, how do we think about
It's in there.
that green space being multi-purpose?
Yeah, so on page 8,
Yeah.
snow storage.
Yep.
Adequate space for snow storage shall be provided on site. You know, look what I did, though, is so as not to reduce the required minimum number of parking spaces. In those cases where excessive snow cannot be properly, it should be immediately removed from the site. You know, I think it still reads.
I would
Maybe we keep that strikeout.
say if we're already trimming the spots and we're expecting people to start to adhere to those and make the changes, if we don't include the strike, then we're at net negative.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just one concern I had because we're looking at them right now. I mean, this year's been different. We aren't used to this much snow this early in the year, but you drive through the parking lots, there's more snow than cars in a lot of them. Like Walmart, especially right now. That's the one that comes to mind.
Go through these after he's done, or? I got a bunch of notes.
Yeah, I
So,
got a bunch of notes too.
Okay.
So any thoughts, as we're going through, any thoughts on any of those other provisions that?
Should we just take turns and rattle off all of our things that I'm sure we all have topics that we want to mention.
Why don't I just kind of finish up and then we can go through. The next section, starting on page 14, are the design guidelines, zoning ordinance, landscape requirements. The issue that we've had is that we have always required landscaping within parking lots, and that's mainly because of our design guidelines. Well, our design guidelines are not mandatory, they're guidelines. And we've never taken a hard, fast approach to that. In some cases we have, in terms of colors and things like that, we've been tough on them. But, we're the city and we have that right to, approve them as we see is reasonable for our community. But we do have those very minimal requirements. It says within off-street parking facilities with 50 or more stalls, landscape islands, peninsulas, or rain gardens should be provided a rate of 180 square feet per 125 surface stalls. It's a minimum standard. What it doesn't include, and what Sacramento has done, is they've given a minimum size. Kathy Wyden, some of you may remember her, she was our city arborist for years and years and years, highly respected throughout the Twin Cities in terms of trees. Always referred to the landscape islands that we were building were tree coffins. And she was exactly right. Typically they're 3 feet wide. And if you're going to try to grow a maple tree, that maple tree is not going to do very well. A smaller tree does okay. I looked through, I drove through just to remind myself the Kohl's parking lot. Again, we're limited. And we're limited in a lot of these large parking lots just because of the high line. We can't plant 60-foot deciduous trees or coniferous trees. We have to keep them small, but there's not saying that we can't do a lot of small trees. And to give them a chance to really grow properly, an island of 6 feet wide. Sacramento, I think, had a requirement of 6 by 7, I think they said. So looking at that, I thought, let's take our parking lot landscaping, put it in the zoning ordinance so it's enforceable, and then provide some basic standards. So some of this language is not new, but 12B, so that's on page 15. Within off-street parking facilities with 25 or more stalls, and I reduced that from 50. Landscape islands, peninsulas, or rain gardens should be provided a minimum of 360 square feet per 25 surface stalls or fraction thereof. You don't happen to have that graphic of that parking lot, Eric, do you? Sure. And again, not as scientific. I think I point that out. This wasn't incredibly scientific, but it made some sense. And I threw these things out there for us to discuss and consider over the next month. The thought with that is some of those Kohl's parking lot, the length of their parking stall lanes were about 25 spaces. So I looked at it and you've got 2 islands on either side. If you take and widen those islands out and make them at least 6 feet wide, and then throw one in the middle, which would help reduce the amount of asphalt and heat island, that's where I came up with about 360 square feet. So.
I'm sorry, Scott, it won't rotate here for me.
It won't rotate for us. Can you just blow it up a little bit?
Yeah. So you want to go to the Menards lot?
You could do that too.
Or the Kohl's?
There's the Kohl's lot.
Kohl's is on the upper, right?
Yeah,
All
all the
right,
Kohl's. I'll just.
So look and see how they did those islands on either end. Mm-hmm. And even though we have those highlines, we could have put smaller trees. We could have put islands and put smaller trees. I think the shorter lengths are the ones further down on the page of that middle lot, which is the Kohl's. Those are 25 foot. So if we wanted to see 6 foot wide islands on either side and then another one in the middle, you're about 360 square feet.
Okay.
I don't think we're asking for too much there. In fact, maybe it's too minimal. But at least it gets us thinking about it and starts a conversation on it. And what I'm thinking, again, I point out the report is most of our commercial areas are fully built. So we don't have the opportunity with bare land to start over like we did, 20 years ago, or how many years it's been. But we do have the opportunity. A lot of these parking lots are being redeveloped. Again, retail's a changing entity, and you'll see around the Dales, you'll see them taking some of those corners and then selling off, subdividing off a piece and redeveloping. At that point, we may have the opportunity to say, okay, as long as you're doing that, we want to see some parking lot improvements. It may be time for them anyway to redo their parking lots and reconfigure and so forth. So it gives us an opportunity down the road, maybe with some of these redevelopments, to incorporate more trees. So, and again, that's where, again, in the parking lot landscaping in bold in the middle of page 15, I say parking lot island should be not less than 6 feet by 6 feet wide in size, and peninsulas. Peninsulas are the little things that stick out from, let's say, a sidewalk, and they stick out. Those are, or from another a large green area. 6 by 6 seemed reasonable. So again, I throw that out there for us to contemplate, to think about, and I guess I'll stop and let you guys, it sounds like you guys have some points you'd like to make about this.
Eeny, meeny, miny, moe.
Who wants to go first?
Well, I guess my question is, so if they're taking part of, say they sell off part of their parking lot, like you see over in the old Herbergers, where they've sold off a portion for coffee, for Caribou Coffee or whatever it is, how does that mitigate any heat to just have another,
How does that, I'm sorry.
How does that, like, if you're just putting another business on the asphalt, you're not mitigating any heat there. I mean,
No, but there would be some landscaping that we can require. So we may not be able to mitigate a lot, but at least with stricter standards, we'll have the ability to have them require more green area and add some more trees.
so I guess what I'm concerned about is putting more on a business that's gonna come in and they have to jump through another hoop to have a business here. And how many hoops do they jump through and they just finally say, well, we're not gonna have your business, put our business there. That's one of my concerns. And then another concern is, I understand we're not following all of these guidelines, but this is from Sacramento, California. How much snow did they get?
Well,
You know?
and I make that point too, is that a lot of the tree varieties, they go into a lot of detail. The only thing that I really took from them of value, again, is the at least 6 foot wide, which I think our arborists would say, yeah, that's probably the minimal of width for a parking island. So, yeah, Sacramento, again, the tree varieties they're listing, so none of that made any sense. But it was a good exercise just to read it and see, here's another community that's doing some things.
But do you see is there a community in Minnesota that you see that is doing something like this, that is, you mentioned somebody, are they doing it successfully? Do you see it? Like, what I see with these islands is it's just a big, accumulates trash and the trees die,
And that's because typically they're too narrow.
Yeah.
They just can't support trees.
Yeah.
If you notice parking lot landscaping, it's a tough time of year to drive around and take a look at these.
Yeah.
But where there's areas where we've done some berming and so forth, and it's wide, you look behind Menards, you look in some of those others, you've got mature trees and they're doing very well. Now those are sometimes big berms, but at least 6 feet is going to give them a little bit of a chance.
Yeah.
And then instead of going through all those standards and maybe we can look at some of those of types of varieties and so forth. I just say all parking lot landscaping design and planting shall be approved by the city arborist. Again, we can put more teeth in that, but Lisa's really good about that, and she'll be right on board with that and start doing that.
And that was another point I wanted to bring up. I've got rain gardens across the street from me, and this last summer they weren't maintained. There's weeds as high, taller than I am. So that is one thing that I've noticed with rain gardens, because Hugo was one of the first cities I saw put in a rain garden. Sand gets in it, debris gets in it, weeds that love that stuff grow up in there, and to maintain it, there's an expense there. And to get all that sand out of there, it's like you said with that other impervious material. I don't know, do you suck it out of there? I don't know, shovel it out?
Yeah, we would only do rain gardens or approve rain gardens if it was totally necessary for stormwater.
Yeah.
What this is going to do mainly is promote flat islands with trees and landscaping, so. And it's a good point about rain gardens. There's good examples of rain gardens that are maintained very well and do very well.
Yeah.
Terra Pros has put in some rain gardens a number of years ago when they built a new facility. We keep them maintained. They're doing what they're supposed to be doing, but yeah, that's a tough battle.
And then my only concern, other than that, was this expense with snow removal and telling people, here's your parking spots. If you got too much snow, you got to take care of it and get it out of here. So that's another expense for businesses, so.
So Scott, if I could comment on,
Yeah.
so part of the thought of doing this, yes, started with the concepts of reducing heat islands, whatever that means, in our community. However, as we think about these things, there's probably 27 steps we could take or propose to reduce heat islands, and there's that large report in your packet. Well, yeah, that's true. And maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. Maybe it has a net effect, maybe it doesn't. However, we do know that simply reducing pervious or reducing blacktop and it has more goods than just heat island reduction. So that took us down this path about parking. But the biggest piece I would argue is of why I think, at least this is probably a little more of my opinion, is we know where in the Kowalski's parking lot is probably our best example, I would argue. That is a big empty parking space. If that were redeveloped, if that came in today under our current rules, the current rules would require them to have that same size parking space. They would have to clear that land, build that parking lot, invest all those dollars. So that's what the rules say now. What we're saying instead of that is leave it grass. Don't make that investment. Don't put those things on a developer. So in concept, maybe you're even reducing your upfront costs to a point when it's ready. So I don't think it's certainly we can go overboard with anything, right? But I think the intent of this is to actually reduce the cost of construction of these huge parking lots, which just aren't necessary. And the second piece is from a heat island standpoint, if that big empty in front of Kowalski's could be redeveloped, that would be great. There would be some heat reduction we would require some landscaping and something to make it look nice. So I don't know if this is a new set of burdens, Scott, would be my thought on it. Matter of fact, it might even save them dollars or generate more income.
Yeah.
Because we no longer are going to require, do you have this 5 per thousand? Now you only need 3 per thousand. Okay, now we can carve out some parcels that are saleable.
I think that starts to entertain more of the commercial development opportunities, because there's been so many meetings here that we're fully commercially developed. We've got this potential residential spaces, those are even limited. Yep. And if we're fully commercially developed and we're changing this, there's no incentives for Kohl's and Menards and Walmart and Target to go and redo their parking lot, as there was a sentence, and I think in Carly's application or memo about incentivizing. Well, what would that incentive be? If I'm Target, I'm going to leave it alone.
Right.
Unless I can sell it and recoup some of that. So to combat the commercial development cap, that's the incentive.
Right.
But then it puts the question on, what are those terms for that new guy to take on?
Yeah. But they couldn't do it under the current rules.
Right.
Correct. Right.
Okay, no, that's,
Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, no.
It's another perspective.
no. I'm done, sorry.
But we won't even talk about the high power lines, right? That disaster. But let's.
Yeah, it's funny because I was thinking about this and thinking, we can put all these trees out in the Kohl's parking lot.
No, you
And I
can't.
drove out there today and went, that's why those trees are so small.
We always have those limitations, but it doesn't mean you don't give it a whirl. Or those parts, then you go back to some of that proof of parking stuff, even if it is a lower number. Maybe there's a portion of a piece of real estate that's near those power lines that they can not necessarily build directly under, but have access to parking under those. So there was ways to probably massage that. If you're giving them the latitude. And that's what I think you're trying to do, Scott.
Right.
Okay, I got a couple before Tim bombards you. So one of them was that kind of incentivizing conversation about, everything's existing, what would convince them to change, but if there's commercial topics, that would bring on the new opportunity to kind of force the hand. So some of this is maybe more editorial stuff. So we already talked about the snow storage strike should not be striked, in my opinion. If we're talking about changing people's parking limitations. Bigger nuances, maybe page 10, number 9, you made a comment, Scott, about directing maximum. And there's some language in here that starts to get confusing, like I'm going to pull out G, boarding houses, at least 1 parking spot, blah, 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 bowling alley, at least 3. Well, if we're saying minimum is, if we're saying the sentences of min/max, we either need to designate both or clean up the language, just get rid of at least and treat it like it's a max.
Yeah, I'm seeing that throughout. That's a good point.
So like funeral homes, just call it 10 parking spaces.
If we strike that at least in front of it, that's going to solve that. Yep.
And then just designate, is that the minimum on, the header of paragraph 9, is that the minimum number or is that the maximum? To justify the numbers throughout. I think it's MM on page 14. Is that a category where it can constitute strip malls? Like, I'm thinking about Carboni's, that whole development. How do we handle entities or businesses in those types of places,
That's always been considered a shopping center because it's, a number of multiple businesses all in one complex. So
okay,
that goes
so that's
to the first
I
place.
would be strip malls.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do we need to define that? Or is that just?
Yeah,
something-
you know what? I think to clarify, I was just writing strip malls, shopping centers / strip malls. I think that's probably a good idea. I should look at the definitions. The definitions are rather specific about some of that, but I'll have to compare that to make sure we're not.
Yeah, got a little more into layman's terms. And then maybe it's a question for the city about Carly's memo. Something that stood out to me, help our city come closer to the 15-20-10 policy. I'm just curious what that is and how this applies.
Oh, so that's in her memo. It could help our city come closer to the 15-20-10 policy that will increase our city's eligibility for grant programs. You know what that is, Eric?
I just don't know what that is, so I'm just curious.
The words are easy to understand, the meaning is not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because if it's incentivizing for grants and then we incentivize the businesses to change their parking lots, just understanding what that is dictates some of our changes. Yeah, it's the bottom of
Yeah, but
our memo.
her exhibit 1. Adoption of having a can be open to citizens. Could also help our city come closer to the 15-20-10 policy. I don't know what that is.
Maybe we could ask her.
We'll have to ask her.
Find an answer to that.
She's probably sitting in front of her TV, hollering out the answer, you just can't hear her.
That was all I had.
Okay.
I have a few items. First of all, I was really curious about what the thought process was as far as timing of this, because this is a bigger issue than, I know it's a lot of pages, was it? How many pages was
Like
it?
100.
Huh?
It was close to 100, I think.
No, it was more than that.
100 and-
Yeah, there's a lot, but anyways, there's a lot of pages of information here. Some of it's really good to read and some of it is just like,
Yeah, it doesn't apply.
why did that get put in here? The first one that I have to say, though, is that yikes about the city of Sacramento. I don't know what they have to do with us here in Minnesota, but I could tell you that the goal, I started reading it, and when I got to the first page, it said their goal is to have 50% shading of all new impervious surfaces for both parking and the driveways within 15 years.
Yeah. That's why it's appropriate for Sacramento, not for us.
Yeah, not here.
But again,
But the guy.
it was an example just to show you what other cities are.
I get that, and so having something to look at is a good idea. I just want to keep it in context.
That's
that
why it didn't make its
Sacramento
way,
doesn't-
you know, the only thing I really took from them is the 6-foot wide.
Yeah, and the only thing I took was the 50% shading within.
Yeah, yeah. I took one look at this, and yeah, that's not reasonable for
Yeah,
us.
yeah. There wasn't any changes to the residential use. I started looking at this more as an update to the ordinance than it was a heat island thing, because when I step back and try and look at it in a bigger context, of all the communities I would think that could really do some impact in starting working on this heat index, this is not the community I would have thought of, the one that's pretty much completely paved in the commercial areas. But I do think there's a lot of things that could probably be updated. You know, on page 5, and this is, I guess, just for you, Scott, under item number 4, lot circulation, except in the case of single, two-family townhouse, quadraminium, and manor home dwellings, parking shall be blah, blah, blah. Those terms don't mean anything to most people. Two-family townhouses, and I don't think most people know the difference between a townhouse and a condominium. And then a quadraminium, I'm not even, I mean, I've been in the business for 40 years, and I don't know what a quadraminium is.
Yeah, they're all defined in the ordinance.
Many-
They're all old terms.
Well, and that was my point, is either update the terms or put them in the definitions, and I didn't see them in
Yeah.
what we were looking at. So same thing with manor home dwellings. I don't know what a manor home is, but I just want to know if that, you know, if that's something that should be looked at, or just, I didn't see the definition. So next page, page 6, I agree that whole page should be removed. You know, that's a page out of the design guidelines book, the architectural standards book, and there's really no reason to have that. in
There's
the
no
ordinance.
reason to have, that's, yeah, I failed to mention that in my comments, but there's no need to have that anymore.
Yeah, and I think that, I think that the ordinance talks about the city engineer doing a review, and the city engineer has this book, so it doesn't need to be in here, but I still think that the city engineer needs to review these things to look for anomalies and look for things that people can pick out of here. You know, I've made a career out of going through people's ordinances and finding the loopholes, you know, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of people like me that are good at it, and the city engineer is our defense.
It says,
or
yeah, on
parkhouse.
page 7 under
To do that.
surfacing, plans for surfacing and drainage of driveways and stalls for 5 or more vehicles should be submitted to the city engineer for review, and a final drainage plan should be submitted for written
Yep.
approval. So,
Yep.
yeah, you're right.
I think, you know, like on the pervious pavement thing, it's a nightmare to maintain. I think they can be continued to be allowed, but I think we have to be really careful about who is asking for it. And that there isn't something in our ordinance where they say, well, I can't get the runoff numbers, but we can do pervious pavement, and that'll take care of it, and the city will take care of maintaining it.
Yeah.
That's the big key, is that the city should not have any responsibility for pervious.
Right now, we
have any
don't
problem
even
with it.
mention pervious pavement.
Yeah.
I'm saying we probably shouldn't.
Yeah, I'm okay with pervious pavement, but I think usually it's the watershed district that acts for it. And then the watershed districts typically want to have the city sign in on an agreement for maintenance.
Sure.
And when you start talking about rain gardens and pervious pavement, the city's potentially taking on things that
For the record,
they don't want to.
the city has, to the best of my knowledge, in the last 20 years, we've not agreed to take over a single piece of private stormwater management.
Super.
To the best of my knowledge. I might be missing something, but
Nope.
it's all part of the developers' agreements
Right.
and stormwater management agreements that puts the burden of maintenance on the private owner. And in the event they don't comply, then we have an assessment process where the city has
Yep.
whatever.
Yep.
So just for the background's sake.
And I'm just pointing out something that I know you're
Yep.
aware of, I know the city engineer, I know Scott's aware of, but I just want to point it out that we want to make sure that we don't say anything about requiring these things and the maintenance of them. City don't have anything
It
to
could
do
be
with that.
paved in gold, we still wouldn't take it.
Yeah.
Well, and that's how it should be. I mean, the developers get the credit for it, for the pervious pavement and the rain gardens. they should be the ones, or their designated people should be the ones paying for it, so. There's an item on page 9. This doesn't have much to do with parking, but setback areas is talking about the quadraminium and townhouse dwellings, but shall be subject to written approval of the abutting property, residential property owners, residential neighborhoods, item number E, but the second sentence,
Halfway down.
subject to written approval of abutting residential
Yeah.
neyors.
This is something that
That's a
the
slippery
city,
slope.
this is something the city has developed over the years. And, you know, the old building official, geez, I'm losing it. And I worked on this language and changed it over the years. And I think we feel pretty comfortable with it. You'll see that I added, said parking pad must be set back at least 5 feet from rear and side property lines. Remember, we had the situation where we had a zero lot line where the people could have put their, and that they maybe will put it right on their property line. So added that, but I don't want to mess with that because it's actually worked pretty well over the years.
It's just the whole idea of giving, allowing the neighbors to have some right of approval over what people do as opposed to the ordinance. That was what I was reading, not about the location of anything in there or anything about the, I just saw that sentence in there and went, whoa. Subject to written approval by abutting residential
We can talk
neighbors.
about that.
I mean, it's good information to find out what the neighbors want at the public hearing.
It basically means that
But-
the neighbors don't approve it in writing, they can't do it, right?
That's kind of what it's saying. I know that's not what's meant there, but I just thought I'd point it out.
We'll think about that one,
Yeah, okay.
at least that portion of it.
Page 11. Now I'm going into the items where you reduced the numbers. It didn't take me very long to figure out you were cutting everything in half. And so there was a few of them here that I thought, well, maybe we can ask some questions, like item M, the elderly senior housing. Man, we got a lot of senior housing in this town, and we should have a pretty good idea how much parking they really need. I mean, there's the older ones, the Ramey Johnson and those, the really old ones, and then there's Bowles Landing and the one on Oak Green.
Now, remember, there's a separate standard for nursing homes and so forth. So this is just elderly housing, let's say over 55 housing would apply to this. But then, if you're talking about nursing homes, that's a different matter where you've got employees, you've got visitors and so forth. That has a higher standard.
I didn't see that one in here.
Yeah, that's EE on page 13.
Huh? EE?
EE on 13.
13.
Okay.
Sanitarians.
But my point is just, how are the current projects working? That's more than anything, just to look at that one, because we have so many of them. The next one is, restaurants and drive-in and fast food. I mean, we should have a pretty good handle on what those are now, and cut them in half may not be the right number, or maybe it'll be more than that, maybe it'll be less than that, but retail stores is another one where just cutting it in half that's a quick way to do it. But
Okay, so for both, going back to restaurants and
Okay.
fast food,
Yep.
that is similar to what a lot of cities, at least in the West Metro, have gone to.
Okay, they've
in
changed to
terms
that.
of driving. One important matter, especially with the drive-through, is 60 to 70% of utilization of a restaurant now, of this type of restaurant, is through drive-through. People aren't sitting as much at a restaurant and eating
Yep.
anymore.
Yep,
So this,
absolutely.
I feel comfortable with that. Retail, I think we could
Okay.
discuss a little bit.
Well, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I'm just saying that we have enough of these kinds of businesses in town that we should look at that. I also wondered about that carrier annex, item X,
X.
the post office. I wonder if that includes that carrier annex, because that's not really a post office facility. There's no public facility in that building. You can walk up to the door, you can
So what's
push
that
a button to
considered?
open the door and let you into the vestibule, but there's no stamps, there's no mailing anything, there's no nothing there. I'm curious if that would, when you try and go up to that, there's not one single open stall in that front parking lot ever. have
You
to
mean they're
park-
all occupied?
They're all occupied. And I don't know what behind is where the trucks are and stuff. I don't go back there.
I
There's a
think
fence
that's
there.
probably
but-
their employees. And
It is. It's all their employees, but I'm just wondering, that isn't really a post office because they don't really have any post office, other than the carriers are there. There's no public interaction with the post office.
And that's
at
why
that
it says
location.
plus one space for each employee. So each employee is going to have their space.
Okay.
And then the other.
But- And I'm not complaining about these things. I'm just trying to point out the ones
Oh,
that I
no.
think that we
Appreciate that.
have some idea, maybe we should look closer than just cutting it in half. GG is another one, the school, and we already kind of talked about that. I know that the school had a permit process when my son was going there, which is back in the early 2000s. They actually had, 2,400 kids in the school, and they had 600 parking spaces. And so they did permits, and the people that could designate 4 people in their car got first choice.
Yeah.
And after that,
But I think
and they
pertaining
got rid
to
of all of them.
Yeah, but pertaining to this, I think that makes sense, and we've talked about that already.
Yeah, well, it shouldn't be any smaller because it's always full. But anyways, that's.
Hey, Scott, for the post office, again, just a nuance of our world, you were probably here when they built that, if I'm not mistaken. I'm just curious, do you recall, because I believe that's a federal building,
Right.
and
We
you
didn't
could,
have any ability to.
you can
you
say,
can't tell 'em anything,
you
I
can't
suppose,
tell them what they can and can't do. So I don't know if at the time they made their application or came to the city, they might have worked through the city, at least from a building permit standpoint. Maybe they just said, we're not putting parking in, and that's why it's full all the time. I mean, who knows what happened there?
There's really no public
There's no
interaction there.
No, you can drop some stuff off, and it's a care. I mean, but that's it. But there's Scott. But it's a
Yeah,
small
I
bit
forgot
of
about that, but
history.
You're right. But we took them through maybe a review process just on our own, saying, well, we want to look at it.
But yeah, they could have said pound sand.
And they said pound sand.
Yeah. Anyway,
Put that in.
Oh, we should get that in the ordinance somewhere.
I think. But it's funny to talk about that history.
Okay, and I have something on item 14, but it was just that I agree with you about moving things from the design guidelines to the zoning.
Oh, okay.
On the next page, 15, this is probably where I have more to say. This is the last thing I really want to talk about is, when it comes to parking lot landscaping, I've had experience from both sides of the fence here, and one of the things that developers typically don't want to do is put trees in their parking lot, because then people can't see the signage on their buildings. And you don't want them to put up all kinds of signs everywhere, but people end up driving around, and maybe not in big parking lot areas like Menards and Kohl's and them, but they're trying to find the building that they're looking for, and they can't find it because, like in Woodbury, they build berms and then they put trees on them, and you can't figure out what's in there until you drive in there, and you find out, well, that's not the one you want, and you drive out and you go to the next one,
Everyone uses their map.
Exactly. You're right about that. But having people driving around looking for the buildings because there's so much landscaping and trees, I don't think is good. The expense to it is it's sometimes difficult because the ordinance probably says that they have to maintain them, and if they don't maintain them, they got to, most people don't go after them for that, except went after Menards, right? But that's because they came in for another permit. So we had to replace their trees then, but other than that, I don't know. And then the other thing that developers complain about with trees in the parking lot is damage to the cars. And you don't want to have any kind of a tree that's got berries on it or plums on it or even flowers on them, because they drop on people's cars and then they're trying to sue the people that own the building and the parking lot. The other thing is in Minnesota, we have trouble with storms and wind and broken branches and trees. And so if you let the trees get too big, then they start becoming a maintenance problem. So I'm not a big fan of trying to get the 50% shade that Sacramento wanted with big trees, but I'm a really big believer in having some landscaping, some islands with some plantings and stuff. I just don't like the idea of big trees. You know what I mean? I know the shade is nice. I think one of the reports that I looked at showed a picture of you know, a big wide walkway with people in the park, and there was all these storied looking oak trees over it, but those trees are 100 years old. I mean, you can't legislate them in an ordinance. You got to build 100-year-old trees, and then Sacramento's ordinance, they say you got to have 50% shaded within 15 years, which means you have to plant maple trees.
But we're not
and-
incorporating
But,
any of that.
so my point is that I'm not a big fan of trees, but I like the idea of making the islands bigger. I'm a big believer in keeping them green, just not trees.
I think that's covered under 12E though. The city arborist would have buy-in on, you know, if it's up on a berm and she can give her 2 cents on, he or she can give her 2 cents on what's appropriate in that spot.
Should
Right.
we, you know, speaking of E, should we, should I talk to Lisa and maybe we put some throw out some minimal standards on that rather than just leaving it up to her?
I think so, because I think.
I think we need to
for some
define that better.
specifics, talk to Lisa about it and see if there's some specific opportunities
Yeah.
there. And even some specific recommendations, right? Because there's different kinds of trees that don't drop to your
No, absolutely. You know,
comments that
Evergreens
clean.
evergreens aren't bad. I mean, other than they block the sight lines, but I can tell you that I live right behind Menards. And when you drive down 58th Street, there's no way in the world you'd know there was a Menards there unless you drive around the front of the building. Those
We do
trees that
have
are on
some-
there, they work, between them and the fence, they work great. And the berm behind Coles is the same thing. You can't tell it's there.
We do have some standards already that we put in our development packet. We'll share this with you the next time. Also, we've used this for years. There's a good example, the furniture warehouse out here at, you know, on the other side of the road. Had a nice landscape plan. Now I'm looking at it and thinking about, yeah, some of it's kind of minimal based upon this, but, you know, so there is some basic standards, and I want to talk to Lisa a bit about that, but maybe there's more that goes here in E, or even makes reference to our landscape.
reference your existing documentation.
Yeah, I think that the last comment I guess to make is that I think staff's done a great job. I don't know how long you've been working on this, but I was hoping that no one was thinking they were going to vote on this tonight, because there's a lot of stuff in here.
Yeah.
You know, and
That wasn't intended.
and
We
you
don't
guys
have-
gave us a ton of information, that's good information, and I think you got a little bit of feedback from us, but I think this is a good idea, and the thing that I really like about it more than the urban heat index thing is, or urban heat island, is the ability to create some spaces that we can have some more commercial development and actually have a way to fix those parking lots. Because right now, like in the end of the Kowalski one, I mean, they just did some major upgrading to that, but I mean, what a mess that was as far as great big holes, and they just don't want to spend any money, but if you told them they could build let's not say a Burger King, because that didn't go over so big, but smaller kinds of businesses on the end of their parking lots, and then share the parking lot, but create some tax base for the city of Oak Park Heights that's, you know, certainly can use it with the things that are coming up here.
Right.
I think this is a great exercise, and I think we should be doing this, but maybe for different reasons than the heat thing. And it's not that I don't appreciate what Carly is looking for here. I think it's a great idea, but I don't know that this is the community to try and pull it off in, you know, trying to get some bigger trees and those
We're
kinds
not
of
going to
things.
see a, you know, major mitigation of heat island effect, but I think it's a really good first
I
start.
agree. So that's all I had to say.
I want to tangent one thing that brought up the splitting spaces was that Caribou example. If that even remotely is covered under AA, they don't have legitimate parking spots, and maybe I just haven't seen it with the construction being close to done, but
There's parking all around it.
They don't need parking.
from the
that's my
existing-
point, is they don't
drive-up
need
only.
parking, but is that gonna be even 100 square feet? 200 square feet, that's 2 spots.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's in Stillwater. So
I suppose you have to have
Not
parking
ours,
for your
but-
employees.
Yeah, so I mean, and even on those drive-in locations, but they're usually being built in a parking lot area, so they would have a variance to share parking with existing parking.
Right.
Even if they're not owned by the same entity, they can always share parking. So it would
A
be.
lot of those shopping centers have cross, you know.
Right. Cross-use
Sometimes their
agreements.
shopping centers were developed, in fact, the Kowalski's was, where they sold off those individual pads. Like the Burger King was an individual pad.
Yep.
But as part of the development agreement, there's always the shared parking arrangement.
Right.
So they could,
and maintenance,
Yeah.
and maintenance.
because they all have to participate in the driveways, so.
So next steps from here. I think we're gonna send
Oh,
it
did you
back.
have any other comments?
I'm happy with all the comments that have been said. Do you have anything else, Tim?
I don't. I think that, we should get some information back and
Yeah.
have another discussion,
Do you want to have another discussion, or do you want us to advertise for a public hearing? You know,
I think,
How much of a hurry is the city council in to get this completed, I guess?
No rush.
you don't think we're in a rush?
I guess I would recommend that we send this back to the city, let you go through, make the adjustments, let us review it on another open concept as, I guess it would be old business, next month. And then if we have any additional comments or adjustments made at that point in time, then we'll send it to a public hearing afterwards.
Why doesn't someone make that into a motion?
I'd like to make that into a motion.
Excellent. And then Jen.
So we have a motion and a second. Did you get that written down?
I did. Thanks.
Okay, all in favor say aye.
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 Motion passes.
Thank you.
Any discussion?
All right, so next topic on the new business was the one we added about new commission member. We need to put out the search. So we need to formally talk about getting a search going for one or go ahead and get two. Looking for them, because Tim's about done.
So I do have the sheet that Julie put together for 2022, and all terms run from May 31st to May 31st. I've forgotten about that. It's not in the bylaws, but it's here, and our 3-year appointments. So Tim, currently fulfilling second full term culminating on May 31st, 2023. So you're done, but the bylaws allow, if the council, if you want to request it, I would suppose, to be extended 1 year. I'll make sure that that's the case.
I guess I have a comment about that. I don't necessarily want to do another year.
Okay.
I mean, I don't mind, but I'd also would entertain if they wanted to extend me until they find someone. If they can't find someone, then I'll stay on until either a year or until they find somebody, and then I'll step off then. But I think that looking around the room, we might have a potential candidate, as I
So do we go ahead
recall
and put
hearing
I guess
from earlier.
Yeah, so do we put the search out for two? Because we'll need one in May anyway. And
Yeah.
we know it takes time. We don't always get a new person in overnight. So I think we should go ahead and put the search out for two individuals. And if we don't find one, Tim will just ask permission to keep you for a while longer.
Well, I think what we need to do is make a recommendation to the city council, because they're the ones that have to do this, not us.
Right.
But I think that inserting or including the information that we have a participant in the audience that has experience, I don't know that we need to look for two people.
So that has to be made a motion?
Huh?
That we have to make that a motion?
Well, I think we need to make a recommendation to the city, and that's what I'm trying to get to, is are we going to make a recommendation to the city then that we look for one person?
I
And
would-
recommend a person that we know is in the audience?
I would make a recommendation to the city that we look for two people, one immediately to fill and one prepared to fill coming in May. We put the search out for two individuals.
I second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any additional discussion? All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Yeah.
Are you abstaining?
So we have 3 ayes and a nay.
Yep.
Motion passes. All right. Do we have any other old business? I don't see any.
I just want to have an opportunity to say why I said nay, and that's because I think that we have a candidate that the city is well familiar with and spent many years on the planning commission, and I think to try and advertise for two, I think it would be better for us to get somebody on board as soon as possible. And so if we would have added it to our recommendation, that the city might appoint him sooner rather than later. So that was my reason for voting no, not because I don't think we need
Do we amend
to have.
that?
But no, I mean,
I
it'll be-
appreciate the reasoning. I just think we should allow the public to have an opportunity. He's in the room tonight. He'll have the same opportunity to send it in. The city council will be able to look at the applicants
Maybe the city council will say no to it.
Right, but I have a
Sure of that.
I have a pretty good feeling that there'll be an application turned in relatively quickly.
Mike's
That's his
no vote
opportunity to
was
turn it in.
Well, I just needed to state that I thought it would go quicker if we recommended to the city. Because essentially what they do, they send out the call for applications, and then you get applications and they come in, and then the planning commission does interviews, and then they come back and they make a recommendation, and then 3 months later, the city council will do something about it.
Well, I think when I applied, there was a pending window of time where nobody applied, and then they got my documentation, so I don't expect a flood of applicants and a lot of interviews and a lot of meetings,
I don't either.
one spot.
I'm just,
I will miss your thoroughness.
pardon me?
I will miss your thoroughness and your attention to detail, sir.
Oh, be careful what you look for, because he's sitting out there going, that guy knows nothing.
So there's no old business today, so we'll move on. Informational, we talked about the search process for looking for the planning commissioner, so we've got an official recommendation going to the city council. I'm assuming that'll go to the city council at the next meeting, which is coming up
Next week on Tuesday.
next week on
24th.
Tuesday, the 24th.
Yep.
So that'll be before the city council at that point. We've got some upcoming meetings coming up. So we've got city council next week on the 24th, Monday's Park and Trails meeting, and then you can see your packet. We've got the meetings coming up in February. Council representation, Commissioner Van Dyke, you're on for the 24th. Is that still going to work?
Oh, yeah.
Perfect. And then I will be on for February 28th. Now that we have a motion to adjourn,
Move to adjourn.
and a second,
Second.
any discussion?
Just that was the first time I didn't make the motion since I've been on here.
Okay.
I gotta get used to not saying anything.
All in favor?
I
Aye. Meeting's officially closed at 7:03. Thank you.
Wunderbar.
61 minutes.
Good discussion, guys. Thank
No, it
you.
was a good discussion.
And thanks, Tim. I'll go through some of the